Hi, this is Rabbi Chaim Coffman. Welcome to our 108th installment of the Torah portion of the week. We're holding my Parshas Miketz. Parshas Miketz is all about the brothers going down to Egypt and, the famine continuing. And Yosef recognizes the brothers and treats them kind of harshly. A little bit hard to understand how he could do that, but it's all about the confrontation between Yosef and the brothers. Now, it's an interesting verse. It says, chapter 42, verse 21. It says, they said one to another, meaning the brothers, truly we're guilty concerning our brother, and that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us. So here the Torah says they finally admit that what's going on around them is because of how they treated their brother. Which seems to mean that up until this point, they didn't think they did anything wrong. Comes along, Mori Rabbi, Rav Gon Moshe Lida, should be well, brings down in Chochma V'das. He says like this, that up until this point we just mentioned, the brothers don't think they do anything wrong, right? Until they see God orchestrating things in a certain way, they don't feel that they've done anything wrong up until this point. Some say that the reason that they judged Yosef, they even God seemed to agree that Yosef deserved to be punished, but even with that they went beyond what they should have done, and therefore now they realize that they've gone beyond, and this is why they're being punished. Nonetheless, they understood that how does God judge? How does God act with us? He acts with us measure for measure. Right? Because of what they did to Joseph, what they did to him, and they caused him such anguish, even though he might deserve to be punished, nonetheless they went beyond what they should have done. Right? They were cruel. And then it seems that Yosef is cruel back. Why? What does Yosef do? He makes them bring down Binyamin, even though Binyamin's really attached to his father, it's going to cause them great anguish. Nonetheless, he does that. So that could be looked at as a little bit of cruelty, being cruel on Yosef's part. But now they realize, because of how he's acting, how Yosef is acting to them, that's how they acted. That's how they acted to Yosef, and now they're getting punished measure for measure. So I think it's a good opportunity, to speak, about this idea. And the idea is that a person, as we mentioned, God is gonna deal with them as He deals with others. In other words, it's going to be measure for measure. Nothing happens for no reason. It's brought down in many places and in many sources that a person in this world is going to get judged, is going to be looked at, as what he does to others and how he acts. Because up until this point, the brothers don't realize. I mean, hard to imagine why they don't, but they don't realize that they even though there was a tremendous act of judgment that was done on Yosef, nonetheless they went beyond, right? As my Rabbi points out, others say the same thing. They went beyond. They acted in a way that was, that was too much. It seemed to be too much for what Yosef had done. So what happens? So God orchestrates it, measure for measure, that they're going to be acted upon the same way. They didn't realize this was Yosef. So what happens? He treats them the way he was treated. Now, if you look back, I do have a video I made on this last year or a few years back. You go on my YouTube channel at Rabbi Chaim Coffman. You can see there, why does Yosef act in this way? Right? Why does he, why does he, act in seemingly a cruel way? So that we discussed another time. We discussed before. So we're not gonna go into that. But this aspect I think is important. How God deals with us. So when something happens, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it is. Whatever trial and tribulation come our way, it's gonna be tailor made for exactly what we do. And what our soul makeup is and how it's going to benefit us in order to reach our potential. That we've spoken about many times. But the fundamental principle here is, and this is something we have to put in our heads, in that when we see things that happen to us, first of all, as the brothers here realize that everything that's being done to them is because of what they did. Now, we're I've spoken about this also, but I still think it's an important thing to bring out. Again, a person cannot make excuses for what happens in their life. Now, there may be things that are beyond our control, right? It could, for whatever reason, it could be our soul. This is the reason, our soul has to go through it. So in this world, the souls come back, it's reincarnated, and, it's been here before, so it has to go through certain things. And it could be based on past life experiences, could be based on what we do as well, but, there are some things that, we may not be able to explain, right? Don't make any sense. So, in theory, we could say, it's based on a past life, right? A past life experience. Even if that's true, and a person goes through a very difficult time, doesn't matter what it is, right? The first thing we're going to do, even if it's above nature, even if it's something that never should have happened, nonetheless, it happens for whatever reason. The fact that it happens, the question is, how are we going to react to it? Are we going to get help dealing with it? Or are we just going to wallow, in our sadness and our difficulty or whatever, and, stagnate or throw off the yoke of Torah, or, whatever the case may be, because of certain situations, that we've been through. We don't have a right to do that. Even if people go through difficult times, right? Everybody goes through difficult times, whether it's livelihood issues, whether it's family issues, whatever the case is, everybody has difficult times. And if things, seemingly go awry, not necessarily based on what we did. It's not based on, if it's based on our own action, right, then we don't have anyone to blame but ourselves. We can feel bad about that, but really, we don't have anyone to blame but ourselves. If something happens, and it's really above nature, it's really something, that really shouldn't have happened. But however it takes place, what do I do? Right? What does the person do? Do they say, "Oh, it's not fair because this happened, that happened, the other thing happened, and therefore, what some people will do is they'll feel so bad, and feel so rejected, or whatever the case is, they'll throw off the yoke of Torah." Now, a person grew up religious and end up, not staying religious. It could be for any number of reasons. The point here is that when we're thrown these difficulties, it's very easy to put the blame on someone else. Now, that person may deserve it. We're not going to say a person's making excuses. This person may deserve it. The question is, and any psychologist will tell you this is a terrible thing to do, is that you're going to take this so hard that you're just going to say, all right, I can't do anything now. Either you can't function properly, or you say, how could God do this? And a person's angry at God, right? And therefore they're not going to be, they're not going to stay Torah observant, or whatever the case is. Do we pass the buck on someone else, or do we try and get help for difficulties that we go through? Ultimately, as my Rabbi here points out, everything comes from God. If everything comes from God, then obviously this is what was supposed to happen. Now again, even if it's something tragic, even if it's something terrible or whatever, again, it could be that we have to be thrust through this, or we have to go through it, because of our, because of our soul and what it's doing here, and all that. But what gives us the right? What gives us the right to say, "Well, this happened to me, so therefore I'm going to drop everything," right? I'm going to drop, Torah observance. Does it mean a person's not in pain? Of course, they're in pain, right? That there's no question. The person getting help for pain, right? They have to realize. Now, this is a very hard thing to do. They have to realize in their mind. It's a little bit easier. In their mind, they have to say, "This is what God did." They have to admit this is what God did. That's why when a person dies, that they're obligated to mourn for mother, father, sister, brother, God forbid a child or a spouse. So before that person goes into the ground, when they die, what does the person do? A person has to make the blessing, very difficult blessing to make. They have to make the blessing, "Blessed are you, God, King of the universe, the true judge." Right? Dayan ha'emet. God is the true judge. What are we saying? We're saying God runs the world. God's the one who took this person away. So, God does good. All things that God does is good. When someone dies, it's tragic for us. Right? Someone who we love, they're taken away. So, it's a very hard thing. But part of the healing process is realizing things happen for a reason. Is realizing that God runs the world, even if we don't understand it. That's why you have to make that blessing and say God is the true judge, because He's the one who did it. He's the one who caused it. Okay, He has a messenger, right? He has the angel of death, the Malach HaMavet, right? Mr. S will call him. That's his job, right? Part of his job is taking souls, right? Taking them out of the body. Obviously, he can't take a soul when God tells him he's not allowed to. He can't go against God's will. Nonetheless, that's his job, right? It's part of his job. So, when something like that happens, so intellectually we can understand if someone damages us or something happens above nature, right? Let's get back to that. Something happens not in our control. Totally not in our control. If it's not in our control, then that means that this is what God wants. Right? Now, if it's something that's very difficult, to deal with, whatever it may be, God is telling us in uncertain terms, God is telling us that I run the world. That I run the world. So the question is going to be, do I accept that? Right? Do I accept that or don't I accept it? So it might be when things are going good, we can accept it. If things are difficult, and that is the Torah mantra, that God runs the world and God's in charge of all things. If God's in charge of all things, He's the one causing it. So the question is, do I take this from my mind, right? Do I take it up here and put it in here, right? Put it, or over here, right? Here, let you see. Over here, my heart. That's the question. So for some people, making that connection is not so difficult. For other people, it's extremely difficult. Because, it's a hard thing to grapple with. Not only that, if a person does something wrong, they very rarely will admit it unless they're caught. Or they'll make excuses. All right, when it comes to, let's say speaking badly against others, right, about Lashon Hara. People will justify that they have a right to speak against someone else. They have an absolute right and they deserve it. Could be they do. It still doesn't mean it's permissible. And there would be plenty of people that go through a rough patch, through a difficult time, and they'll blame God. Now, it could be God's the one who's orchestrating it. In this case, not something you did, but something for whatever reason you have to go through. So we can say it's not fair. Right? We can say, why do I have to go through it? Why do I have to suffer through this? So the question is, does God, does God run the world or he doesn't run the world? It doesn't mean I necessarily have to fathom how he does it. As my Rabbi said many times, we mentioned it many times, that, if you're happy with the way God runs the world 95% of the time, the other 5% you won't understand in 10 lifetimes. It doesn't really matter why things happen. The question is how I'm going to deal with it. If a person had money, for his whole life, and then God takes it away, does he blaspheme against God? Say, why are you doing this? Or does he realize that, God's been very good to him, or her, or them, or whatever, and they're thankful for what they had? Okay, now this is a rough patch. This is what God decided he's going to do. At the same time, is there still gratitude? Is there gratitude for what he had before? Instead of just complaining about what the situation is now. Because many people could be jumping up and down, yelling and screaming, saying it's not fair, why do I have to go through this, and, whatever the case is. If we really believe that God runs the world, and this is what God's causing, causing a person to go through, then it must be he knows what he's doing, and, we have to deal with it in the proper way. So what does the Talmud tell us? Talmud tells us, the person that, when things happen to a person, he has to look into his deeds. What is he doing? How is he acting? All right, we have to look within. Again, the person that's doing it to us potentially is just a messenger. Right? That is the Torah hashkafa. That is the Torah philosophy. He's a messenger. If he's a messenger, why am I going to go after him? If he caused me damage, yeah, I can sue him and get recompensated for what he's done. Fine. Right? But the reality is, he's just a messenger. Now, if he's just a messenger, I can say, well, he's not guilty. God's sending him as a, he's using him as a messenger. That's fine. But everyone has free will. If everyone has free will, okay, God used him and used his free will to do this. Question is, and we'll keep coming back to this, is that something I accept or not? Do I believe that in the Torah and how God runs the world or not? So, a very Jewish concept, major Jewish concept, is the fact that God interferes in nature. Right? He intervenes. How do I know? Very simple. The Torah tells me God took the Jewish people out of Egypt. Right? Black and white. But God put them there in the first place. But he took them out. So the Torah says, Exodus chapter 20, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God. Why am I the Lord? How do you know I'm the Lord your God? God took you out of Egypt. So God intervenes in history. I would have said, let God say, I'm great and I created the world. Forget about taking me out of Egypt. But no one was there when he created the world. No witnesses. Who were the witnesses that God took us out of Egypt? You have more than 3 million people witnessed it. Right? And they got the Torah, Mount Sinai, right after. So we have evidence. We have a tremendous amount of evidence. That being said, we understand God intervenes. So therefore, if God intervenes in history, He intervenes in the world in general, right? If he wants things to happen, He'll pull strings to have it done. And He's running things, and we're just sort of acting things out. The question is how we're going to react. But the reality is, He's the one pulling the strings. If He's the one pulling the strings, then I have to think a little bit, right? Let's talk about an individual, not, forget about the world for a minute, right? Let's talk about an individual. So a person's going through something, whatever it is. It's because God wants you to go through it. It can be painful. It can be difficult. There are a lot of things that can be, attached to this. But the thing is is I have to realize where it comes from. It doesn't. If a person does it themselves, so I think there's a Malbim or a Ramban in Eov in the book of Job that says, that a person's going to blame God for everything that happens to them, right? But there are things that God can say, I didn't tell you to do this, right? You transgressed the 614th commandment. Don't be stupid. You did something stupid, right? You weren't thinking. You caused this to happen. So God says, okay, I let it happen. I didn't stop it. So, we can't blame God for everything. He puts us in certain situations, but there are things that are going to depend on us, and then the repercussions will be what they are. God can say, I didn't tell you to do that. I wasn't interested in you do that. I just didn't stop you. They say, why am I liable? You know what's going to happen, right? God knows what's going to happen. He's orchestrating everything. But at the end of the day, I still have free will. No one's forcing me to do anything. Right? No one's putting a gun to my head and say, do this or do that. So we make the bed, we lie, and we can't use excuses. We can't say, oh, because of this, because of that. Look what you did. You're the one who does the action. Right? As this video is being recorded, everybody has angels following them along, in their lives, and they're recording everything. So after 120 years, the person gets upstairs, they're going to get judged. God's going to bring all the witnesses that recorded everything you did. Kids, I didn't do that. Think again. All the testimony is going to be given. Then God's going to judge it however he sees fit. That's pretty scary, different ways. Nonetheless, we have an obligation to take stock of our lives to see what's going on. Right? That's why every night person should think about what they did during the day. What they said, what they accomplished, what they didn't accomplish. It gives the person a real feeling of where they're holding, and what they're doing in this world. Because we're not giving much time to think in this world. We're too busy. We're running around, trying to make livelihood, trying to raise families, all this. It's busy. It's time consuming. What I have time to, to think for, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes about what I'm doing and where I'm holding. No, we're busy. We get distracted. Yeah, God understands that. Right? That's what the evil inclination wants. Exactly that. To distract us. To make things so difficult we don't have time to think. That's not what God wants, but he allows the evil inclination to do that. Right? He allows that to happen. Nonetheless, we have to think. We have to look into what's going on. We have to, as the Talmud says, we have to look into our actions. Something happens, whatever it is, it's based on what we do. Or it's based on what our soul went through previously. So God's going to put us in certain situations based on measure for measure. Right? Exactly what my Rabbi says here. This is the connection between Joseph and his brothers. Because of what happened to him, and they acted in a cruel way. So measure for measure, Joseph acts in a cruel way against them. But it's interesting, as we mentioned at the beginning, they only realize until this happens. But you see, their lives are based on this truth. Their lives, doesn't matter how long it took them to figure this out, but their lives are based on the fact that they have a direct connection. No intermediaries. They have a direct connection to God. If something's happening that's not good, it must be they did something. So they're taking the bull by the horns. And they're saying it's based on me. Not based on external factors. Not based on what someone else did. It doesn't matter what someone else did. Right? That person's only the messenger. If he's only the messenger, then hopefully we get the message. But we have to look in to our actions. We may never figure out why certain things happen. Right? Something that, a person may get punished for today or tomorrow or whatever could be based on something that was done a month ago or a year ago. Now it's just time for payback. So we don't know, but everything is orchestrated, from him, through different messengers for us to get the message. Now, hopefully we get the message. But it's a parallel image. See, this is what people don't want to hear, which I'm very good at. right? Telling a lot of things that people don't want to hear. It's a parallel image of how we're acting that God's going to deal with us. Rav Tzadok HaKohen, Zecher Tzadik Livrocho, may his name be blessed, in Pri Tzadik, I think it's in Pri Tzadik, his book he wrote on Chumash, very deep book, a lot of it steeped in Kabbalah. One thing he says there is that if you want to see where we're holding in the world, Jewish people in general, he says, look and see what's going on. For example, if immorality, let's say, modesty, let's say better. Modesty, let's say women in general don't dress modestly. So Tzadok says, you know why they don't dress modestly? Because Jewish women, the majority of Jewish women don't dress modestly. If they don't dress modestly, you say, why should that come out in the world like that? So Rav Tzadok says, it's like looking into a mirror. It's a mirror image in a negative way. It can be in a positive way as well. But in this case, it's negative. So if women don't dress properly, you're going to say they were never educated, they were never this, never that. All right, that all could be true. But see, everything's based on what the Jewish people do. If we do the right thing, so good. Comes out in a positive image. If we do the wrong thing, comes out in a negative image. So if you're looking in the mirror, mirror on the wall, you look in the mirror to see, where we're really holding. So if things are going haywire, in different ways in the world, that means we're not upholding our end of the bargain. That means we're not doing what we need to do. That being said, we have a lot that we need to work on. But again, Rav Tzadok is mimicking this image, no pun intended. He's mimicking what we're saying over here. It's measure for measure. You don't work on, Jewish people don't work on the laws of modesty. So it comes out in a negative way in this world. Everything is measure for measure. So, we have to look at it, in those terms. Now, certain things I would think should be obvious. Something like, modesty issues, for instance. I think, if we see that modesty's gone haywire, right, or the lack of modesty, then that we can understand. If there's more, let's say, fraud or more stealing or more, different things like that. Yeah, it's based on the individual, but it's really based on the fact that, we're not being moral. We're not upholding our end of the bargain. When we don't uphold our end of the bargain, the world goes to pot, even worse. Because we're not giving over the proper spiritual influence that we need to do by our everyday lives. You're going to say, wow, that's tremendous responsibility. Yeah, 100% it is. And at some level we may never reach that high potential that we want. Doesn't matter. We still have to keep the Torah mitzvahs to the best of our ability, regardless of what God throws our way. So my Rabbi is always fond of saying that, you're in the army. You're in God's army. Doesn't matter what happens. Doesn't matter, you got 2 hours of sleep. You got 5 hours of sleep. You had to get up in the middle of the night. Whatever the case is, you still have obligations to do. Right? If someone goes in the army, all kinds of things can happen. They're thrown in all kinds of different situations. And they're still there. They're expected to fight. They're expected to defend. Doesn't matter. You slept. You didn't sleep. Whatever the case is, this is what you're supposed to do. Spirituality is no different. Right? It's spirituality you have to fight that much more for. So regardless of everything going on, you still have to, you still have to make blessings when you eat. You still have to keep the holidays. You still have to keep Shabbos. You still have to learn as much as you can. There are plenty of things you have to do. But we can't push things aside and say, well, this happened and that happened, I'm not going to do anything. That's a cop-out. Right? I heard someone say recently, that today's generation of kids, growing up, they're made of plastic. Why are they made out of plastic? Because, any little difficult thing, like they fold. Maybe they don't have proper tools to deal with, etc. But they're not very strong. This could be for any number of reasons, not the topic for now, but they're not very strong. So any little thing that happens is like a major catastrophe. I mean, it has to be dealt with. It certainly has to be dealt with. It's you can't just let someone flounder, even if they're even if they might be made out of plastic, whatever the case is. But I think and I've seen many times people will make excuses for the lot they've been given. And again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're in charge, if they did it to themselves, or other people did it to them. If other people did it to them, so then you might need therapy to deal with it. But at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge, as the brothers over here show us, we have to acknowledge God's in charge. God's the one calling the shots, and everything that happens, A, for a reason, and B, it's all measure for measure. There are no acts of cruelty, in that sense, because this is what the soul has to go through. It could be, in this case, the fact that they act, totally cruel to Yosef, even if he deserved to be punished. They went beyond. So what happens? Comes full force, right? Full circle. And full circle means they get what they deserve. And if they get what they deserve, they can't complain. That's what they did. So the brothers say, over here, it's because of what we did. They made a rabbinical court. They judged Joseph and he deserved to be punished. God says, yeah, that might be true. But I didn't tell you to go this far. I didn't tell you to be that cruel. So now, what did they say? They said it must be that we're getting punished measure for what we did to him. Now, that's greatness. Because they're not passing the buck. They're realizing their action caused this. When do we ever admit anything? We mentioned before, when we get our hand caught in the cookie jar. That's when we admit it. Even though we might make excuses why it's in there. Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we have to take responsibility, for our actions. When we get upstairs after 120 years, and God's going to ask us different things, why we did this, why we did that. We can't deny we did it. Right? It's being recorded. We can make excuses. We can say, it's not like that, it's like this, it's like that. And God can judge it however he's going to judge it. Either he'll say yay or nay. Right? That's what will happen. We can't pass the buck. Passing the buck, and no offense, and I don't mean to, no one should take offense. It's not something that's directed at anybody. Anyone specifically. But if a person goes through a difficult time, it doesn't give you the right to pass the buck. It doesn't give you the right to say, I don't deserve this, and I don't deserve that, and how could God do such a thing? Right? So people make that excuse. Right? They'll make that as an excuse. You're right, God's where he always is. He's the one orchestrating it. Why do you want you to go through this? If I knew that, I wouldn't have to make these videos. I'd be world famous, in the cover of every magazine, every newspaper. I'd have prophecy. Right? I don't have prophecy. At least not the last time I checked. So we don't know. But a person goes through a difficult time, before you throw in the towel, get help and deal with it. I'm not saying it's going to be easy to deal with. But a person has to realize that everything's being orchestrated from above. And that there is a reason why you specifically have to go through this. But as it is, you're now pushing the blame on God. Okay, maybe he deserves it. Right? According to what we're saying, he definitely deserves it because he's the one doing it, for whatever reason. Question is, how am I going to deal with it? am I going to blaspheme against him and just check out? Because we'll say life isn't fair. This is, person's been dealt a pretty bad hand. And they're going to say because of that, God, I know you're out there, so, people can become a heretic and say, well, he must not be running the world. Because if God is all good, why would he allow this to happen? There are many that will say that. They'll probably use it as an excuse, right? But it'll give them a way out. They'll say, if God is so nice and so good, why did this tragedy happen? Why did that happen? I always find it funny, people use that as an excuse, as a block, and say, well, I don't have to do anything because, obviously, if God is good, that can't happen, and therefore I can throw the entire Torah out. That people are very easy to do it. Again, because we're made out of plastic. Right? We're a generation made out of plastic. We don't want trials and tribulations. We pray every day we shouldn't have them. At the same time, we don't grow without them. But for goodness sakes, even with all the difficulty, we have to understand where it comes from. We have to acknowledge he's the one doing this. And sometimes it's hard. I agree, it's hard. Because people go through all kinds of different situations. So you might say, I'm not on the level to be like Joseph and his brothers. They're at a much higher level. But they're teaching you a basic concept. I mean, it's basic in a certain sense, but the major concept of Judaism. And that is when something happens to a person, God knows what he's doing. God knows which address to give different things to. So what we're saying is when we pass the buck, we're saying, I know better than God. That's what we're saying. Because we're not taking responsibility. Because if we take responsibility, we have to admit I'm doing something wrong. Nobody wants to admit we do anything wrong. Right? It's a very hard thing to do. Or you have people, that'll admit it all day long. They just won't internalize it. So yeah, I did something wrong. Deal with it. I'm a terrible person. Deal with it. I mean, it's also wrong. So, the idea is, as is brought down, as the Ramchal brings down in Path of the Just, in the Mesilas Yesharim, we have to think about what we do. We have to think about what happens to us. Because nothing happens for no reason. Right? That's the tragedy that Amalek brought to the world. Amalek brought suffix, brought doubt to the world. Amalek said, things happen because they happen. Chance happenings. Torah doesn't believe in chance happenings. Torah believes everything's run by God. Right? That's why, this idea of, what Amalek brought to the world has to be destroyed. We have to get rid of it. We have to realize, that God's in charge. Nothing happens by accident. Oh, you want to understand, so far away from giving to the Torah, you want to understand why things happen? Not for us to know. Every once in a while, maybe we get a bone. God will throw us the bone and show us why certain things we have to go through. But in general, we have no idea. Zero idea. Torah is the blueprint of creation. The Torah is what makes the world go round. It's what keeps the world going. We have to keep it to the best of our ability. Even when it's hard. Even when a loved one is lying in front of us. There's an obligation to make that blessing. That God is the true judge. Is it easy? No. Absolutely it's not easy. But it answers up a lot of things. It gives us the ability to realize that everyone can have a connection to God. And that God has a connection to us. Not like he's going to build a world and disappear. He has a direct connection. We have to let him in. But we have to put our minds and our souls into the Torah. That's our obligation. And we have to think the way the Torah wants us to think. The brothers could easily have said, wow, this is a terrible thing. Look what we're going through. And never acknowledge it's based on what they do. What they did. But they teach us an unbelievable lesson. The lesson is, whatever happens, we're going through the motions. We're making decisions based on all kinds of other factors. We're put in certain situations. But ultimately, it's not about why this person did this and that person did that. It's about what I did or what I didn't do. And God's going to look at that and judge it however He judges it. But make no mistake, many of us make excuses. And they're just there to fool us. To justify why we did what we did. Even if the other person deserves, my tongue lashing, doesn't give me a right to do it. There are parameters. What I'm allowed to say, what I'm not allowed to say. God understands that, but He can put you in a situation where now, you're busy building your sukkah, you take your hammer and you go whap on your thumb. You're in pain. So what's the first thing a person's going to do when they're in pain? They're going to scream out. But you got to be careful what you say. Right? You don't want to curse. You don't even want to think of the curse. That's a much higher level. So it's an awareness. It's an awareness we're sadly missing. Because we look in the world and we'll say the world revolves around me. And only me. At the same time, got to realize, got to take stock of what I do. And I got to see, right? We have to see in our own lives what's going on. And when things happen to us, stop. Did I do anything that might have caused this? Sometimes we'll figure it out. Maybe sometimes we won't. And even if we don't figure it out, it doesn't mean it's not measure for measure. I know it's a little bit harsh, a little bit deep. But it's a major concept of Torah. And there are many people that, even if they're Torah observant, they give this lip service. They might believe it up here, but it's not in their heart. The goal is to take what we learn, live by it, and realize that God knows what He's doing. And if we're going through whatever we're going through, He's the one who put us through it. And if He's the one who put us through it, He's giving us a message. The question is, are we getting the message? Right? That ultimately, is the question. And are we growing? Are we growing in spiritual terms? Or are we just going through the motions? Or are we just numb? We're not really thinking about anything. We're just living. God made this world the way He did. There are a lot of distractions. Definitely. But who says I'm supposed to be distracted? So a person gets distracted, try and figure out ways not to get distracted. Try and find time to think about the things that are important. You got to find that time. Not easy. Certainly not easy. But if not, then we just go through a vicious cycle. And we just, keep making the same mistakes. We just don't think about what we do. And that's all we're put in the world for. We're put in the world in order to do what God wants. We're put in the world to strive towards Him. And if we're not, we're going in the wrong direction. So therefore, the good things that we do, we have to harp on and continue to do more. And stay away from the bad things like fire. You're not going to play with fire. It's dangerous. So you're going to stay away from it like the plague. The more we do that, the more we have a fighting chance spiritually, in this world. That's the only way. Because, if we allow ourselves to be open, to terrible things, and say, no, it's not going to affect me so bad, it's not this, not that, it's going to have a negative effect. And that negative effect is going to stop you from doing what you really need to do. It'll be a bad, a person will go in a bad way, just never get out of it. So you have to make a plan. Figure out how I'm going to do it. And stay away from it, because when a person's seeped in it, even though it's hard to get out, you have to try and get out of it. Because that's going to stop you from spiritual growth, and will stop you, it'll stop you and hinder your ability to reach spiritual perfection, which means that you won't reach your potential. You get knocked down enough, you just give up. But, that's not what God wants. He wants you to fight, regardless of what He puts you through. He wants you to, to strive, to reach that potential and do what you need to do, regardless. It's like being in the army, we spoke before. Regardless of what happens, in our everyday life, we still have an obligation. We still have an obligation to serve Him, and to serve Him the best way that we can. I want to remind people that I give conversion classes. I also give no-hide classes once a week. No-hide classes not live, but I give those classes once a week. I have 2 question and answer sessions usually on Tuesday and Thursday. Tuesday 10 a.m. New York time, Thursday 2 p.m. New York time. I also have a class in Path of the Just, again, not live. Anyone who's interested in that, they can let me know. Also, I have a class. We just finished our series in my Intro to Kabbalah class on Derech Hashem. We finished that. We're now doing Duties of the Heart, Chovos Levavos. We're still holding by the introduction. So anyone interested in that can let me know. Take a look at my Facebook fan page, Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism, or Beyond Noahides. Take a look at my blog, orthodoxconversion.com. And you can contact me if you want at rabbichaimcoffman@gmail.com, RABBICHAIMCOFFMAN @gmail.com. Wishing everyone a great Shabbos.